times the VO2 difference. Well, here we have a measurement analogous to cardiac output, which is the alveolar ventilation rate. And all we're doing is we're taking the difference between the fraction of inspired oxygen minus the fraction of expired oxygen. So we've got a difference there of 0.03. And so that would be about 150 milliliters based upon the data that's given here, and that's what you came up with. So according to the data you're given here, the oxygen uptake rate based upon measurements at the mouth would be 150 milliliters of O2 per minute. So you did that problem correctly.
And I look at the VA over Q ratio. If all the numbers are supposed to align, then would we be able to use the VA over Q ratio to arrive to some kind of a...
Yes, so Mr. Tyler calculated the alveolar ventilation rate to be 5,000 milliliters of O2 per minute. The cardiac output is 5,000 milliliters of O2 per minute. That's our standard textbook value. That comes up to VAQ ratio of 1. Anybody else with questions about the homework assignment? All right. Impressively, Jocelyn was the first person to complete that assignment. I should have said past tense was. We'll put it pretense, will be. Right? All right, anyways. Moving along. Review session. I've got 2 review sessions scheduled. One is for next Wednesday night, December the 11th. I scheduled that in accordance with our normal time that we meet. So that will start at 5:30 p.m. if you can make it. If you can't make it, no harm, no foul. What would I prefer? I prefer all of you to be there because there's a lot on this next test. There's a lot. Yep, and there's a lot of problem solving on the next test. Yes.
Is it online, Zoom?
Yes, there's a Zoom invitation that's been posted, so if you go out under announcements, you should see a Zoom invite there. And then also, there should be a Zoom invite for Saturday morning, December the 14th. That's the Saturday prior to the final, which will be held on Monday the 16th. All right, everybody good in that regard? Good, okay. All right. So tonight we're going to begin to transition on over into renal physiology. And the kidneys perform 5 basic functions. The first is to regulate the concentration of ions in the blood, in the plasma, really. Why would we care about that? Anybody tell me? I mean, why would we care about regulating the concentration of ions in the blood? Yes, sir?
For homeostasis.
Okay. Any other reasons?
Structure determines function.
Okay, all right. Anything else? I mean, do ions, other than just having certain concentrations, do they serve any important purpose at all, or are they just there just for the heck of it? That's how we evolved, and who cares?
pH.
What was that, Elizabeth? I didn't quite hear you. Did you say that you're really concerned about potassium levels? Is that what you said?
Yes.
And why?
Because it is one of the really sensitive ions that has to do with excitability.
Excitability. That's right. Yeah. So all of you know that the excitable cells of the body have these leaky potassium ion channels that determines the movement of potassium ions, determines the resting membrane potential of these cells, and determines their excitability. And if you have abnormalities in the concentration of potassium, that can cause significant changes in the excitability of cells. Which excitable cells are we interested in? The neurons that make up the body, the heart, skeletal muscle. So very, very important. The regulation of blood volume. Who cares about blood volume? Blood volume is not important. Well, come to find out, it's pretty darn important, because if you come over here and you take a look at this modified diagram I put up here, under filling pressure, all of you know that blood volume is a key determinant of filling pressure, and it's the kidney that plays a critical role in determining blood volume. And it does that through regulating the so-called filtration rate, the reabsorption rate, and the difference between these two is the excretion rate. That's the rate at which you're pulling down your blood volume. Because what shows up in the form of urine, that's coming from your plasma. That's your plasma volume that shows up in the form of urine. And I know that none of you, this isn't certainly true for any of you in here, but on occasion individuals can go to bars and things like that, and maybe consume a lot of liquids, a lot of libations. And the next thing you know, some of these individuals will say, hey, time out here, guys, I gotta go to the restroom. Well, according to that diagram over there, if I consume a lot of beverage, my blood volume's going up. If blood volume goes up, that means filling pressure is going up, which means EDV is going up, which means that stroke volume's going up, which means cardiac output's going up. And that means that the pressure in the circulation is going up. And I've got these little pressure sensors sitting right here, and they're going, oh, wait a minute. Blood pressure, the mean arterial blood pressure has gone up. We're at 110 instead of being at 93. So what does the body do? It alters its physiology to increase the excretion or the removal of the plasma volume and pull that back down. Really nice negative feedback loop. I'm sure none of you in here have ever experienced the scenario that I'm describing. It also, the kidneys also play an incredibly important role in regulating the pH of the blood. So we've got our chemoreceptors here that are looking at the concentration of hydrogen ions, and they basically manipulate, modulate, control the pH on an acute basis, short-term basis. The kidneys are playing an incredibly important role chronically over long periods of time in terms of regulating the concentration of hydrogen ions in the blood. Why do we care about that? Because by regulating the concentration of hydrogen ions in the plasma, we're really regulating the concentration of hydrogen ions in the fluids of the body that bathe the cells of the body, which determines the pH of those cells. And all of you would come back and sit there and say, according to the three fundamental principles that I mentioned to you on night number 1, we're talking about structure determines function. Proteins are the machinery of cells. The structure of those proteins is affected by things like temperature and things like the concentration of hydrogen ions. And a great example of that was the right shift in the O2 dissociation curve, where you could see that an increase in hydrogen ions causes a structural change in the hemoglobin molecule and alters the affinity that the hemoglobin has for oxygen. Endocrine function. Anybody tell me, what's an important hormone that the kidney secretes? Starts with an E, ends with an N. Miss Jocelyn, you're smiling.
Erythropoietin?
Erythropoietin, that's right. Some of you told me that erythropoietin is a hormone in the bone marrow. I don't think that's what I said during lecture. What I said is that erythropoietin is secreted by the kidneys and acts on these hematopoietic stem cells in the bone marrow. That's what I said, I hope. And last but not least, the kidneys play a critically important role in the removal of waste products. So if somebody asks you what are the 5 basic functions of the kidney, here they are right here. And as it turns out, all of you, I think, would tell me that the functional unit of the kidney is what? Kent Wynn, what would you say? What's the functional unit of the kidney? Okay, I'll ask Elizabeth.
Nephron?
The nephron. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. So what we're going to do is we're now going to focus in on the physiology of the nephron. And here you can see in the outline that the basic processes of the nephron involve the anatomy of the nephron, filtration, which is over there in our equation over there to the right, reabsorption, which is in that equation over there to the right, excretion, which is in the equation over there to the right, and then secretion. We're not going to talk about secretion. That's, for our purposes, for our story, that's unimportant. And then once I'm done doing that, we're going to get into factors that regulate what is a phenomenon, which is known as the glomerular filtration rate, a very, very important parameter in terms of kidney function, very important. And then I'll describe for you the various factors that influence the glomerular filtration rate. Then we'll get into reabsorption and the various mechanisms that are involved in reabsorption, the key ions that we're interested in. You can see we got some of our favorite friends here. We've got sodium ion, we've got glucose, we've got hydrogen ions, we've got a new type of ion channel known as a sodium-potassium chloride ion channel. And then item E, write this in your notes. No ambivalence whatsoever. You need to know the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone story. This is one of the most fundamental stories of renal physiology, renal biology. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. These are a set of hormones. And once we get done with that, then we're going to get into so-called diuretics. The word diuresis means what? Mr. Cow, what does diuresis mean?
To urinate.
Yeah, it's the production of urine, right? That's what diuresis is. And so we can manipulate the function of the nephrons and change the rate at which they're producing urine. For instance, if we want to bring down blood volume, we want to increase diuresis. If we want to protect blood volume, we're going to typically not use anything to do that. But on the kidney level, this is a huge target for the regulation of cardiac output and blood pressure. So there's this whole class of drugs known as diuretics. And diuretics are drugs that are used to increase the production of urine, which means we're going to produce a reduction in blood volume. And so here you can see there's a list of diuretics that you're going to need to know for test number 4 and hopefully for the remainder of your careers for 40 years plus. And there's some very classic drugs in here that I'll emphasize when we get to this, but there are the so-called loop diuretics, one of which is furosemide. There's another name for furosemide. Mr. Cow, what would you tell me that is? Starts with the L. Oh, wait a minute. What would you tell me? You don't know? Oh, I'm surprised. Elizabeth, how about you? No? Starts with the L, ends with the X. Mr. Cow.
I thought it's Losartan.
Lasix.
Lasix, that's right. So Lasix, incredibly commonly used diuretic. There are the so-called thiazides, hydrochlorothiazide. You can see that under 2A there. That's a very, very commonly prescribed diuretic. And I'll say a pretty powerful diuretic, very, very effective. A lot of these I'm speaking from experience, so I'm not just making this stuff up. I'm telling you based upon my own firsthand experience. There are potassium-sparing diuretics, and then there's this last class of diuretics. I want you all to make sure you put an asterisk next to that. These are all important, but they're the so-called ACE inhibitors. Up above here, I told you that one of the most important stories in renal biology is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So ACE, what does that stand for? That stands for angiotensin. There's that word right there, angiotensin. Angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Great class of drugs, very, very powerful, very, very commonly used. Very important for patients with heart failure. And the biggie there is the one on the bottom, clonazepam. There are many different types of these ACE inhibitors, and I'll give you other names. But you can see right off the bat here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to give you a couple others. So this list of drugs that you need to know for test number 4 has blossomed. Because I gave you what, 6-ish, 8-ish for thinking about the heart. Yeah, these in there. We've got alpha-1 blockers that are acting on the smooth muscle cells of the arterioles, things like doxazosin, for instance. There's a fair amount to know. Yeah.
You said that the diuretics, they're drugs used to increase production of urine, thereby, what does it do to the
Reducing blood volume, right? Because I'll come back to what I said before. Your urine is coming from the plasma in the blood. So if we increase the production of urine, what we're really saying is we're increasing the removal of plasma from the blood, which by logic, you'd sit there and say is going to reduce blood volume. And that's cool, right? Because we now go over here to our algorithm and we know, okay, blood volume's going down, filling pressure is going to go down, EDV is going to go down, stroke volume is going to go down, cardiac output is going to go down. And what's a critical determinant of our total peripheral resistance? The answer to that is cardiac output. Right here. And in this 5-step model, there is a ton of physiology, a lot. And I want to encourage all of you, for those of you who go off into nursing school, PA school, nurse practitioner school, keep that and use that as a reference and build upon it. And I will show you how to build upon it on Monday night, because instead of having just that one little diagram of circulatory system, we're going to put in parallel circuits in there. Because that's really how our circulatory system is designed, is that with a bunch of parallel circuits. We have blood flowing to the kidneys. That would be a parallel circuit. We've got blood flow being distributed to the muscles of the body. That's another parallel. We have blood flow being distributed to the brain. That's another parallel component. So these things aren't in series, they're arranged in parallel. And you can take the diagram I've given you and you can build that into that diagram and just build upon the complexity of it. And the beauty of this diagram is it's a problem-solving model. Once you know the logic, It's easy to solve problems that you've never been exposed to before. Okay. So we're going to talk about the nephron now. I'm going to describe a little bit of the anatomy. This is just a conceptual diagram. Obviously, it's not anywhere close to representing the true anatomy of a nephron. So this part of the diagram is going to represent the circulatory component of it. We've got this region, which we'll say represents the afferent arteriole. This bow, if you will, we're going to say that that represents the presence of the glomerular capillaries. Miss Kathy Lake, where does gas exchange take place? What type of blood vessels? Arterioles, right? Does any gas exchange occur at the level of arterioles? Why not? Okay. When we talk about gas exchange, that involves what principle, what law? Fick's law of diffusion, right? That's good. It's very good. And as part of Fick's law of diffusion, there's a very important component in there if we're sitting there thinking about why gas exchange is not effective across the walls of arterioles. And what parameter, what factor is that, Mr. Vargas?
Distance.
That's correct. That's delta X, right? That's exactly right. Very, very good. Excellent. Whereas in capillaries, we've got basically a distance of one cell that things have to move across. And so the point that I'm getting at is that in thinking about the filtration, the filtering of the plasma, that can't occur in an arteriole. It can't occur in a venial. It cannot occur in an artery or a vein. Instead, it occurs at the level of capillaries, the glomerular capillary. And for those of you who've had your anatomy most recently, you know that there's something very interesting about the walls of these capillaries. Anybody can tell me what's the unique aspect of the walls of these particular capillaries?
Aren't there like pedicles, little feet pedicles?
Okay, there's feet pedicles, all right. Yes, sir. Ms. Tyler.
They're fenestrated?
Ah, they've got these windows in them, right? He says they've got fenestrations in them. Fantastic, very good. So please understand that if this is a capillary, the fenestrations are all throughout the walls of the capillary. I'm just going to represent the presence of the fenestrations by putting these little gaps in here. And these fenestrations make the walls of the glomerular capillary to be very leaky. Listen carefully to what I'm going to say right now. We can take all of the capillaries of the body, except the glomerular capillaries, and measure their filtration rate. And here's the filtration rate, the movement of fluid out of the capillary. Talking about all the capillaries of the body except for the glomerular capillaries. That would be 1.8 liters per day. For the kidneys, the number is 180 liters per day. In other words, these fenestrations make these capillaries 100 times more leakier than all of the other capillaries of the body. So the presence of these fenestrations are really an important component in terms of the physiology of the nephron. So blood is entering into our nephron through the afferent arteriole, and then it moves through the glomerular capillary, and then into the efferent arteriole. What color am I going to go with here? Let's see. Now, wrapped around the glomerular capillary, actually I should say reverse, but for the purpose of this diagram, we've got what all of you would tell me is Bowman's capsule. Oops. Extending off of Bowman's capsule is the proximal tubule. This is a very simplified diagram of a nephron. Then we've got the so-called thick descending loop of Henle. Coming off the thick descending loop of Henle, we have the thin loop of Henle. being the good anatomist that you are, you all know that this name here is in honor of Don Henley. Mr. Vargas, you know Don Henley, right? No? Oh man, you're our resident musical expert here. Don Henley, anybody tell me, Don Henley, what famous musical group did he play for or with, or did he found? Nobody in here, wow. Is that because you guys are overly consumed with being a Swiftie, or? They're gonna be playing at the Sphere. Have any of you guys seen the Sphere in Las Vegas? If you've never been there, go see it. It's amazing. Don Henley with the Eagles. I believe he passed away 2 years ago, maybe longer. All right. All my silly little jokes aside, we've got what is known as the thick ascending loop of Henle. Miss Jocelyn, what comes after the thick ascending loop of Henle?
I believe it's the distal tube.
Distal tube, that's exactly right. Very good. And then that gives rise to the so-called collecting duct. All right. So this is a very generic description of the nephron. One last structure I need to put in here. And please listen carefully to what I'm about to say. So if everybody would just look up at the board, let me just do my little spiel and then you can go ahead and incorporate what I'm going to show you. Up above here, I'm just going to show a tubular-like structure. And here's the point I want to make. Is that wrapped all around this structure is a capillary. And the name of that capillary, Miss Jocelyn, since you did so well on that last question, you get rewarded. And here's a reward. I'm going to let you have Mr. Cow volunteer to answer this question. What do you think? Is that a good reward? Michael?
Can I call a friend?
What was the name of that show? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? What was the name of that show?
With Nancy something.
What was it?
I think you're right. Wants to be.
It's the vas erecta.
Okay, all right. I need a different name for it. The peritubular capillary. Peri, around. Tubule, here, capillary. And so, make sure you understand that this peritubular capillary is not above the nephron. It's wrapped all around the structure of the nephron, the tubules of the nephron itself. Now, as it turns out, again, if we could come along and make these measurements on each of us in the room, we would find out that the flow of plasma from the glomerular capillary into Bowman's capsule would be about 100 milliliters of plasma per minute. And we're going to refer to that as the glomerular filtration rate. So there are 4 fundamental processes in the nephron. There's filtration, reabsorption, excretion, and secretion. We're only talking about the first 3. So here we've got the plasma, which is being filtered, and the fluid is moving from the peritubular capillary, from the lumen of the from the lumen of the glomerular capillary into Bowman's capsule. And this is step number 1. And this is our filtration. And what we're interested in is what is known as the GFR. That's the glomerular filtration rate, and our textbook value for the GFR is 100 milliliters per minute. Well, if we were filtering the plasma and every minute we filtered 100 milliliters of the plasma into Bowman's capsule, and if that fluid continued to move through here and nothing else happened and it exited down here, that would mean that every minute we would be producing 100 milliliters of urine, which is not logical. If you sit there and think about typical bladder, it holds maybe around 300 mLs, maybe can handle more than that when it's very distended, but 300 is a decent ballpark number. So we would be spending a lot of time in the restroom if there wasn't something else happening. Now, something else that's happening is what is referred to as reabsorption. So reabsorption is occurring primarily at the level of the proximal tubule. And here I'm going to put number 2. I'm going to put reabsorption. And the proximal tubule plays a huge role in putting the filtrate, putting the plasma back into the circulatory system at the level of the proximal tubule. And it turns out that of the 100 milliliters per minute that are being filtered at the level of the proximal tubule, we're reabsorbing about 60 milliliters of that. I'm just going to put, up here I'm just going to put 60 milliliters per minute, or I'm going to put approximately 60%, meaning of the filtrate. At the level of the thick ascending loop of Henle, we have another region where the reabsorption is very significant. So here I'm going to put reabsorption, and I'm going to put 20 milliliters per minute. Or approximately 20% of the filtrate. So at this point, of the 100 milliliters per minute that's being filtered, we've captured 80% of that, with the majority of the filtrate being recaptured or reabsorbed within the proximal tubule. At the level of the distal tubule, we have more reabsorption occurring. And here, the rate of reabsorption is approximately, we're just going to say ballparkish, 10 milliliters per minute. I'm going to put approximately 10%. So now, of our 100 milliliters per minute that's being filtered, we're reabsorbing, at this point, 90 milliliters of that per minute. And at the level of the collecting duct, we also have some important reabsorption occurring here. And here we're reabsorbing about 9 milliliters per minute, or about 9% of the filtrate. So Austin, what would you say? At this point, we've reabsorbed what percent of the total filtrate? Yeah, 99%. And the nice thing is our textbook value for GFR is 100 milliliters per minute. So what's a normal excretion rate? 1 milliliter per minute, right? That's our textbook value for the rate at which we produce urine. So here, I'm gonna show the arrow here. We're gonna put number 3, and we're gonna put excretion and our textbook value is approximately 1 milliliter per minute, or approximately 1% of our GFR. Questions? Don't be bashful, speak up. There has to be something unique about the proximal tubule such that it accounts for the majority of the plasma that's being reabsorbed, right? Hopefully that makes sense to you. Is that here clearly the majority of the reabsorption is occurring here within the proximal tubule. And we'll get into some of those critical factors that are built into the cells of the proximal tubule itself. What I want to do now is I want to come back and focus on step number 1 and the factors that determine the filtration rate. So I'm going to come along, just get rid of this part of our diagram. And Kent, what's the concentration of sodium in the plasma?
14.
So all of you are going to tell me the concentration of sodium in the plasma. Remember, the concentration of sodium in the plasma is identical to the concentration of sodium in the interstitial fluid. So your answer is?
140 millimolar.
That's correct. It is 140 millimolar. Very good. Chan, what's the concentration of potassium in the plasma? Starts with an F and ends with an R. Ms. Knudsen,
Yes.
what's that? You said you passed to Mr. Cobb. Is that what you just said?
No, I just said yes.
I'm just joking. What's the concentration of glucose in the plasma?
Customers.
And Michael, do you want to call a friend? You can call a friend that's sitting very close to you, since she returned the favor back your way, all right?
Sure, Jocelyn, my friend, is a professor.
She comes out very good, excellent. She said the concentration of glucose in the plasma is 100 milligrams per 100 mLs. All right. Now remember, we've got these fenestrations that allow the plasma to be filtered. And here's an important thing about these fenestrations, an important property of these fenestrations. They allow all components of the plasma to move that was sad. From the glomerular capillary to Bowman's capsule. With the exception of proteins and red blood cells. Really, really important. And Mr. Looming,
Yes.
given that information over there, what's the concentration of sodium ions within Bowman's capsule?
Also 140.
It is also 140, that's exactly right, because everything is moving from the glomerular capillary into Bowman's capsule in exactly the same proportions that exist here within the plasma of the glomerular capillary. So over here we know by definition the concentration of sodium is 140 millimolar. Miss Kathy Lay, what's the concentration of potassium in Bowman's capsule? Fantastic. We turn to our expert on blood glucose levels.
It's gonna be 100 milligrams per 100 milliliters.
That's right, very good, excellent. And of course, these are just examples, right? These are meant to highlight some key ions and metabolites, but we can apply this to everything. If you know the concentration of the chloride ion here in the glomerular capillary, by definition, you know its concentration over here. If you know the concentration of calcium ion here, you know the concentration in Bowman's capsule. Now, I'm not putting these up here as examples just for the heck of it, as you're going to find out. Sodium plays a critical role in the reabsorption of everything. Everything. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take all this stuff and we're going to put it back into the plasma in exactly the same proportions that exist here. And most of that is going to be due to the reabsorption of sodium. So you have to start thinking about how is it that sodium moves across cell membranes. So we're back to membrane transport. We're back to week 2 of this course. Somebody asked me way back when, is test number 4 comprehensive? I wouldn't categorize it as that, but the answer that I provided to that particular individual is that there are principles that you learn at the beginning that are certainly applicable to what you need to know at the end, because these things are, we learn these certain principles, we learn about these certain ion channels, and come to find out they weave a theme all throughout physiology. And in terms of thinking about the movement of sodium right off the bat, you're thinking about sodium ion channels. You're thinking about sodium potassium ATPase pumps. You're thinking about sodium calcium exchangers. Lots of interesting things. But put in your notes that the reabsorption of, we're going to say as a general rule, the reabsorption of everything is linked to the reabsorption of sodium. To get fluid to move from the glomerular capillary into Bowman's capsule, what must be present?
Pressure.
Say louder.
Pressure.
A force has to be present, right? And the term we're going to use to describe that force is pressure. There has to be a pressure difference across that wall of the glomerular capillary to drive the filtrate into Bowman's capsule. Very good. Excellent. So I'm going to write a little equation, and here's what this equation says. It says that the excretion rate of X. X is a wild card. Could be whatever it is we're focused on or interested in. The excretion rate is equal to the filtration rate of X minus the reabsorption rate. Of X. And what we're going to focus on is this filtration rate of X, and here I'm going to put glomerular filtration rate, the GFR. And the GFR is determined by several forces. One of these is known as PCAP. PCAP is the hydrostatic pressure within the glomerular capillary. So here I'm going to put P cap. This is a driving force that wants to push the filtrate into Bowman's capsule. And we're going to actually say that P cap is equal to approximately 55 millimeters of mercury. So that's the pressure within the glomerular capillary that wants to push blood against the wall over here, drive fluid this way, and drive fluid into Bowman's capsule. And the magnitude of that, we're saying, is about 55 millimeters of mercury. Now, there also is a hydrostatic pressure within Bowman's capsule. And this pressure in Bowman's capsule opposes P cap. So we're going to come along, we're going to put a second factor in here. So I'm going to put P BC, we're just saying that that's the hydrostatic pressure in Bowman's capsule. And between these two, I'm going to put a negative sign. So PBC wants to push fluid back into the glomerular capillary. And let me make sure I get the right number here for you. Yep. That's about 15 millimeters of mercury. And a different way of describing the effect of PVC is a so-called back pressure. For any of you who have hot rods and you have headers on your engines, I know all of you know about these types of things. The exhaust, as it comes out of your cylinders in your car, there's a back pressure in the tailpipe, in the valves itself. And so that's what this is. This is a back pressure that's actually opposing the flow of the filtrate into Bowman's capsule. So that's about 15 millimeters of mercury. So at this point, you would sit there and say that there's a net force of about 40 millimeters of mercury that favors filtration. Everybody with me on that? PCAP, 55 millimeters of mercury. PBC, which is 15 millimeters approximately. And there's a third force. And a few moments ago, I told you that everything is filtered in exactly the same proportion that it exists here within the glomerular capillary. So, Ms. Camilla, there were two things that are not filtered. What were those? Do you want to call a friend? Do you have any friends in this row, that row, the row behind you? Oh, you got friends over there. Miss Elizabeth.
Proteins and red blood cells. Proteins and red blood cells.
Correct, yeah. All of you know it's not normal to have blood showing up in your urine. All of you know that. If you sit there and think about athletics, in boxing, boxers typically wear pads back here where your kidneys are located, called kidney pads. And that's because you'll see some of these guys swinging on around and trying to hit their kidneys. And in some cases, what happens is that as a result of those boxing matches, they do damage their opponent's kidneys. And so that then leads to blood showing up to the urine. And that tells you that this barrier has been damaged. All of you know, well, maybe not all of you know, but certainly some of you know that through infections, you can end up with blood in your urine. And again, that infection can be impacting the walls of the capillaries here. Football players, talking about American football, they typically are wearing kidney pads also to protect the kidneys from being damaged as a result of football. Because when you take a look at some of the collisions that occur, they're pretty, can be pretty brutal. All right, so here's what happens, is that imagine we've got water flowing from the glomerular capillary into Bowman's capsule. So I'm just going to put H2O. But we heard from Elizabeth that proteins cannot move from the glomerular capillary into Bowman's capsule. And so if that's the case, which it is, as the blood flows through the glomerular capillary, what happens, Elizabeth, to the concentration of proteins?
It should go up.
They do go up, that's exactly right. Very good. And by definition, if the concentration of proteins goes up, Miss Lay, what happens to the concentration of water? The only way the concentration of something can go up is that the concentration of water goes, exactly, she said down. No, I heard you said down. Right? That's the right answer. Is the only way the concentration of something can go up without adding to it, to the solution, is that the concentration of water goes down. Do you agree with that?
Not quite sure, but I thought that.
I'm just asking you, by definition, the only way the concentration of something can go up without adding anything else to that solution is that the concentration of water in that solution goes down. That's a fact. Now here's another fact. Is that as the concentration of the proteins goes up, it creates an osmotic pressure that wants to cause water to move from where to where? Mr. Vargas.
From high to low concentration.
So where would that be?
Back into the
2 thumbs up. Very good, Eric. So we've got this osmotic pressure that is created due to the fact that water can move into Bowman's capsule, but proteins cannot. And so as the blood transits through the glomerular capillary, the concentration of proteins increases, and in so doing, that creates an osmotic pressure that pulls water back into the glomerular capillary. So here I'm going to put another dotted line, and we're going to call this pi cap. And that's the osmotic pressure in the capillary. And you're going to understand that that osmotic pressure in the capillary is caused by this increasing concentration of proteins. It's the proteins that create this osmotic pressure, pulling water back into the glomerular capillary. And it turns out that a typical value for pi cap is right around about 25 or so millimeters of mercury. So here I'm going to put a minus sign. I'm going to put pi cap. Anything that affects the hydrostatic pressure in the glomerular capillary will have a corresponding effect on GFR. Miss Maria, you're an EMT. And you're out on call one night, and all of a sudden you get a call, and there's this accident on the 5 freeway. You and your ambulance, you run on over there, you arrive there, and you can see that there's a significant injury there, a significant wound. This individual's bleeding out. And so you're going to do what? What's your first thing you're going to try to do, assuming that everything else is A-OK? Stop the bleeding. You got to stop that bleeding. Where are we at over here in this diagram?
Based on the accident?
Based upon the accident, where are we at? This person's lost a liter of blood. I hate to even see a liter of blood on the ground or
Blood
on
volume?
blood volume. That's right. So blood volume is going to go down. Filling pressure is going to go down.
BDV is going to go down.
Keep going.
Stroke volume is going to go down.
Yep.
Cardiac output is going to go down.
Okay.
Down.
What's gonna happen to PCAP?
Gonna lower.
It's gonna go lower, that's exactly right. What's gonna happen to GFR?
It's gonna go lower.
What's gonna happen to our filtration rate?
Down.
What's gonna happen to the rate at which we're pissing away our blood volume?
Down.
Yeah, we're gonna, in a sense, be trying to protect our blood volume, right? That's kind of cool physiology, isn't it? Is that you've got this whole cascade of events that ultimately are gonna produce an effect over here and cause this to go down. Assume I'm a crazy maniac one night. I decide to go out and have one beer. Say I have 2 or 3 beers, 4 beers, 5 beers. All of that I'm drinking, it goes into the gut, and from the gut, it's absorbed into the circulatory system. And so now all of a sudden, the volume of blood has expanded significantly. And there's a set point for blood volume. I haven't talked to you about this, but a normal blood volume is what? A liter of blood.
No,
That's normal, right? A liter?
it got to be more.
Huh?
Got to be more
It's got to be more? Like how much more? Would it be 4 liters more?
I would say 5.
Yeah, I would say that a textbook value for blood volume is about 5 liters of blood. Well, you can imagine, you go and you forget drinking alcohol, you could be drinking sodas, you could be drinking just plain water. Your blood volume is going to expand. And that's going to change mean arterial pressure. Come over here, PCAP is going to go up. If PCAP goes up, what's going to happen to filtration rate? It's going to go way up. That's going to cause the excretion rate to go way up. And rather than having to go to the restroom, say once every 4, 5, 6 hours, you might sit there and have to go to the bathroom every hour for a couple hours to unload that extra blood volume. Okay, questions about this? If you're confused by it, just speak up, please. Don't be bashful. Nobody's confused. Yes, sir.
When you said infections can affect
The
or you can see blood in your urine. Is that from like UTIs and stuff?
if it passed way up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why does you like if you don't treat a UTI for a long time, why does it then become a kidney infection?
Because the infection can spread on up back into the
and then,
kidneys.
So does it it destroys the
Yeah, we're going to affect the walls of the glomerular capillaries, and there are other conditions that can do that as well. But the key thing is to understand that was good. The red blood cells are never ever supposed to move from the glomerular capillary in a bonus capsule. And typically the only way they do that is when there's been damage to the kidney itself, which by definition would imply there's damage to the walls of the glomerular capillary. Okay, I think that's it for this part. When we come back on next Monday night, we're going to start focusing on the reabsorption side of the equation. So we'll be over here, and we're going to talk about different types of membrane transport that impact the reabsorption. And we're going to start out with sodium because, as I said, our rule is going to be that the reabsorption of everything is linked to the reabsorption of sodium. So with that, I'll see you guys upstairs in about 15 minutes or so. We're going to be doing the heart sound lab tonight combined with the EKG. It should be fun. If it works right, it's pretty cool to actually see the physiology actually in motion itself. All right, so I'll see you up there. If you got any questions, comments, thoughts, come on.